She said, "My father sent me here as punishment." But she ended up choosing to stay with me. "I'm not here because I want to be," Sonia hissed, her designer heels sinking into the mud of the farmyard, the rain pasting her golden hair to her cheeks. "My father sent me here as punishment. 2 months in this wasteland, and then I get my trust fund back." Bharat stood on the porch, wiping grease from his calloused hands with a rag, his face impassive beneath the brim of his weathered hat. "I don't care who your father is or what you're worth, city girl," he replied, his voice a low rumble over the thunder. "Here, you work or you don't eat, and you can start by mucking out the stalls." The storm had been threatening all afternoon, a bruised purple bruise swelling across the horizon of the vast, open plains of the Dakotas. Bharat Harvey watched it from the porch of the farmhouse, the weathered planks groaning under his weight. He was a man carved from the land itself, broad-shouldered, hands permanently stained with soil and engine grease, his eyes the colour of a winter sky, holding a quiet, enduring strength. His world was the farm, a sprawling inheritance of wheat and cattle that demanded every ounce of his sweat and soul. It was a solitary life mostly, save for his foreman, Juan Chan, and the occasional seasonal worker. But today the solitude was shattered by the roar of an engine entirely unsuited for the rutted gravel road. A sleek, midnight blue sports car, entirely too low to the ground, bounced and scraped its way toward the farmhouse, throwing up a rooster tail of muddy water. Bharat frowned, wiping his hands slowly on a rag. He wasn't expecting anyone, certainly not anyone driving a machine that cost more than his combine harvester. The car shuddered to a halt near the barn, engine ticking hot in the cooling air. The driver's side door swung open, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then a slim leg emerged, clad in impossibly tight denim and ending in a stiletto heel that immediately plunged into a muddy puddle. A string of sharp curses, muffled by the rising wind, drifted toward the porch. Finally, the occupant extracted herself. Sonia Lemoine was a vision of chaotic, misplaced elegance. Her blonde hair, clearly styled in a salon thousands of miles away, whipped around her pale, furious face. She wore a silk blouse that looked fragile enough to tear in the breeze and a leather jacket that screamed expensive, careless rebellion. She slammed the car door with a force that made the sleek metal shudder, then turned her glare toward the farmhouse. Bharat didn't move. He watched her pick her way across the yard, her face contorting with every squelch of her ruined shoes. She looked like a tropical bird blown terribly off course, exotic and entirely out of her depth. When she finally reached the bottom of the porch steps, she stopped, crossing her arms over her chest. The rain began to fall in earnest now, fat, cold drops that instantly plastered her hair to her cheeks. "Are you Bharat Harvey?" she demanded. Her voice was sharp, cultured, and dripping with disdain. "I am," Bharat replied, his voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to harmonize with the distant thunder. "My father, Richard Lemoine, said he called you." Bharat's expression remained impassive. Richard Lemoine. The name meant nothing to him, but the attitude radiating from the girl told him everything he needed to know. She was trouble, the expensive kind. "I don't know any Richard Lemoine," Bharat said simply. Sonia's eyes flashed, a startling vivid green against her pale skin. "He's the CEO of Lemoine Global. He owns half the real estate in New York. He said he arranged this. 2 months. 2 months in this wasteland. And then I get my trust fund back." She threw her hands up, the silk blouse clinging to her arms as the rain soaked through. "He sent me here as punishment. A character-building exercise, he called it." Bharat stared at her for a long moment. He took in the ruined shoes, the shivering shoulders, the sheer, blazing defiance in her eyes. She expected him to be intimidated. She expected him to cater to her, just like everyone else in her life probably did. "I'm not here because I want to be," Sonia hissed, leaning forward, challenging him. Bharat tossed the rag onto a nearby chair. He descended the stairs slowly, stopping on the bottom step, looking down at her. "I don't care who your father is or what you're worth, city girl," he said, his voice dropping in volume but gaining a dangerous edge. "This isn't a playground and it isn't a rehab centre. Out here, you work or you don't eat. I need hands, not a headache." Sonia recoiled slightly, surprise flickering across her face. Clearly she wasn't used to being spoken to this way. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Bharat said, turning back toward the door. "You want to stay? Fine. Your room is in the attic, dinner is at 6, and tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. you can start by mucking out the stalls." He didn't wait for her response. He walked inside, the screen door slamming shut behind him with a finality that echoed louder than the thunder. The next morning broke clear and agonizingly bright. The storm had washed the sky a blinding blue, but the air was still heavy with humidity. Sonia awoke in a room that smelled faintly of lavender and old dust, the mattress lumpy beneath her. Every muscle ached from the tension of the previous day, and the silence of the farmhouse was unnerving, vast and heavy compared to the constant hum of the city. She dragged herself out of bed, digging through her expensive luggage for something that wouldn't be immediately ruined by dirt. She settled on leggings and an oversized sweater, tying her hair back in a messy bun. She checked her phone. No signal. A fresh wave of anger washed over her. This was archaic. This was torture. When she finally descended the creaking stairs, it was nearly 8 o'clock. The kitchen was empty, the scent of strong coffee and bacon lingering in the air. A note was pinned to the refrigerator. "Mucking pitchfork is in the barn. Juan will show you where. B." Sonia stared at the note, her jaw clenching. Mucking. She knew roughly what it meant, and the thought made her stomach turn. She marched out the back door, the morning sun surprisingly warm on her face. The farmyard was already bustling with activity. Tractors rumbled in the distance, and the sound of lowing cattle drifted from the far pastures. She spotted Juan Chan near the barn, a stocky man with weather-beaten skin and a kind, albeit amused, smile. "You must be Sonia," Juan said, tipping his hat. "Berat said you'd be joining us. Late start, eh?" "I'm not exactly an early bird," Sonia retorted, crossing her arms. "Where's this pitchfork?" Juan chuckled softly, leading her into the cool, shadowed interior of the barn. The smell of hay and animal sweat hit her like a physical blow. He handed her a sturdy wooden pitchfork, its prongs worn smooth by years of use. "Stalls 1 through 6, Juan instructed, pointing down the aisle. "Wheelbarrow is by the door. Dump it out back in the compost pile. Holler if you need anything." Sonia watched him walk away, leaving her alone with the daunting task. She approached the first stall, the rich, pungent odour making her gag slightly. Inside, a massive draft horse snorted, watching her with large, dark eyes. She tentatively prodded the soiled bedding with the pitchfork. It was heavy, wet, and smelled awful. She tried to scoop it up, but the pitchfork slipped, sending a shower of dirty straw over her pristine leggings. "Damn it!" she yelled, throwing the pitchfork down. It clattered against the wooden floorboards, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. "Tantrums won't clean the stalls," a voice said calmly from the doorway. Sonia spun around, her face flushed with anger. Berat stood there, a silhouette against the bright sunlight, leaning casually against the doorframe. "This is ridiculous," she spat, gesturing wildly at the stall. "I'm not doing this. I'll pay you. Name your price. Just let me sit in that room for 2 months and pretend I'm working." Berat pushed himself off the doorframe, walking slowly toward her. His expression was unreadable. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at her ruined clothes and her furious face. "Your money is useless here," Berat said, his voice quiet but firm. "I told you yesterday. You work or you don't eat. I don't care about your trust fund and I don't care about your father's lessons, but I do care about my animals, and they need clean stalls." He reached past her, picking up the pitchfork. "Watch," he instructed. With practiced fluid movements, he demonstrated the technique, digging the prongs deep into the bedding and lifting the heavy load with his legs, not his back. He tossed it into the wheelbarrow with effortless grace. "It's about leverage, not just strength," he explained, handing the pitchfork back to her. "Try again." Sonia hesitated, staring at the pitchfork as if it were a venomous snake. But there was something in Berat's eyes, not mockery, but a quiet challenge. She grabbed the handle, mimicking his stance. She dug in, strained, and managed to lift a small scoop into the wheelbarrow. "Better," Berat murmured. He didn't offer praise, just a simple acknowledgement of the effort. 5 more stalls to go. Dinner is at 6. He turned and walked away, leaving Sonia alone again. She stood there for a long time, the pitchfork heavy in her hands. The anger was still there, burning hot in her chest, but it was mixed with something else now, a stubborn, prideful spark. She wasn't going to let this man or her father break her. She gripped the handle tighter and turned back to the stall. The first 2 weeks were a blur of aching muscles, blisters, and an exhaustion so deep Sonia felt it in her bones. She smelled perpetually of hay, dirt, and animal sweat. Her hands, once soft and manicured, were rough and calloused. She learned how to drive the smaller tractor, how to mend a fence line, and how to recognize the signs of a coming storm in the shifting winds. Bharat was a demanding taskmaster. He rarely spoke unless necessary, his instructions brief and direct. He didn't coddle her, and he certainly didn't pity her. But he was also fair. He never asked her to do a job he wouldn't do himself, and he never mocked her mistakes. He simply expected her to try again, to do better. One evening, after a particularly grueling day hauling feed sacks, Sonia sat on the porch steps, staring blankly out at the darkening fields. The sunset was a spectacular display of fiery oranges and deep purples, a beauty she was only just beginning to appreciate. The screen door creaked and Bharat stepped out carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. He handed one to her without a word and sat down on the step beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "You did good today," he said quietly, looking out at the horizon. "That feed is heavy." Sonia took a sip of the cold tea, savouring the sweetness. The praise, rare as it was, felt significant. "I thought my arms were going to fall off," she admitted, a wry smile touching her lips. "They'll get stronger," Bharat replied. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of a cow. It was a comfortable silence, lacking the tension that had characterized their early interactions. "Why do you do it?" Sonia asked suddenly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "This life, it's so hard and lonely." Bharat turned his head, his blue eyes studying her face in the fading light. "It's hard," he agreed, "but it's mine. Every seed planted, every calf born, it's a part of me. There's a peace in that. A connection to something bigger than yourself." He looked back at the fields. "Out here you can't fake it. You can't buy your way out of a drought or a bad harvest. You just have to put your head down and work through it. It strips away all the bullshit." Sonia thought about her life in New York, the endless parties, the superficial friendships, the constant pressure to maintain an image. It felt hollow compared to the raw, visceral reality of the farm. "My father," she began, her voice soft. "He sent me here because he said I was spoiled, that I didn't appreciate the value of hard work." She paused, tracing the condensation on her glass. "He was right. I was a nightmare when I arrived." Bharat chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that warmed the cool evening air. "You were certainly vocal." Sonia laughed, a genuine, unforced sound that surprised even herself. "I'm sorry for how I acted." "You don't need to apologize," Bharat said. "You're still here. That says more than any apology." He stood up, his tall frame blocking the last rays of the sun. "Get some rest, Sonia. Tomorrow we're branding calves." As he walked back into the house, Sonia watched him go. The resentment that had fueled her for the past 2 weeks was gone, replaced by a strange, quiet respect for the man and the life he led. She was still counting down the days until her trust fund was unlocked, but for the first time, the thought of leaving wasn't the only thing keeping her going. She looked down at her calloused hands, a small smile playing on her lips. She was changing, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't hate what she was becoming. The branding of the calves was a chaotic, visceral symphony of dust, heat, and the panicked lowing of cattle. The Dakota sun beat down mercilessly, baking the earth until it cracked and turning the corral into an oven. Sonia stood at the edge of the fray, a bandana pulled up over her nose and mouth, her eyes stinging from the swirling dirt and the sharp, acrid scent of singed hair. 2 weeks ago she would have fainted at the sight, or at least retreated to the porch with a cold drink and a string of complaints. Today she was holding a thick rope, bracing her boots in the dirt as Huan Chan expertly flanked a struggling calf, bringing it to the ground with a soft thud. "Hold it steady, Sonia," Huan yelled over the din, his face streaked with sweat and grime. Sonia threw her weight back, her core tightening as she kept the rope taut. Her muscles screamed in protest, but a strange, fierce pride kept her planted. She watched as Bharat approached, the branding iron glowing a dull, angry orange in his heavily gloved hand. He moved with a practiced fluid grace that belied his massive frame, stepping in to press the iron against the calf's flank. The animal bellowed, a brief puff of smoke rising into the stifling air. And then it was over. Bharat stepped back, nodding at Juan to release the ropes. The calf scrambled up and trotted off toward its mother, indignant but unharmed. Bharat pulled off his leather glove and wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist. He caught Sonia's eye and gave a sharp, approving nod. It was a tiny gesture, but to Sonia it felt like a medal of honor. The rhythm of the work was grueling, a relentless cycle of catching, holding, and branding. By noon, Sonia was covered in a layer of fine grey dust that clung to her sweaty skin. She had just handed Juan a fresh rope when the sound of an approaching vehicle cut through the noise of the herd. It wasn't one of the farm's battered work trucks. A pristine silver Ford F150, polished to a mirror shine, rolled up to the edge of the corral. The driver's door opened and Wayne Popper stepped out. Wayne was a man who looked like he belonged on a billboard for agricultural insurance rather than an actual farm. He wore pressed denim, a pristine white Stetson, and a silver belt buckle the size of a dinner plate. He was a local land developer and corporate farm owner, and his presence immediately caused the atmosphere in the corral to drop by 10 degrees. Bharat's jaw tightened. He handed the branding iron to Juan and ducked through the wooden rails of the fence, his stride purposeful and aggressive. "Wayne," Bharat said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that Sonia could hear even over the restless cattle. "You're trespassing." Wayne leaned casually against the side of his expensive truck, picking a piece of lint off his shirt. "Just being neighbourly, Bharat. Heard you were branding today, seeing how the herd is looking." His slick, calculating eyes drifted over Bharat's shoulder, landing on Sonia. He smirked. "And I see you've got yourself some new, decorative help." Sonia stiffened, her hands balling into fists at her sides. She felt a protective surge, not just for herself, but for the dirt, the sweat, and the honest labour Wayne was mocking. Bharat stepped sideways, deliberately blocking Wayne's view of Sonia. "State your business, Wayne, and then get off my land." "Off," Wayne chuckled, a dry, humourless sound. "Always so hostile. I'm actually here to do you a favour, Bharat. The bank is getting antsy. 2 bad harvests in a row, the price of feed skyrocketing. They're looking at your margins and frankly they're bleeding. I'm here to offer you a way out." Sonia felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Bharat's broad back, the tension radiating from his shoulders. She had assumed the farm was a sprawling, prosperous empire. The thought that Bharat was struggling, that he was fighting a losing battle against the bank, made her chest ache. "My land isn't for sale," Bharat growled, taking a step closer to Wayne. "Everything has a price, Bharat," Wayne countered, his smile faltering slightly under Bharat's intense glare. "You hold on to this pride of yours much longer, and the bank is going to take it all anyway. I'm offering you a fair buyout. You can pay off your debts and walk away with something. I'm not walking away from my grandfather's land. Now get in your truck, Wayne, before I forget my manners entirely." Wayne stared at him for a long moment, the hostility between the two men crackling in the hot air. Finally, Wayne shook his head, a patronising look of pity on his face. "Suit yourself. But when the foreclosure notices start getting tacked to your door, don't come crying to me." He climbed back into his truck, the powerful engine roaring to life, and sped off, kicking up a cloud of dust that coated Bharat's boots. Bharat stood perfectly still for a long time, staring after the truck. Sonia slowly approached the fence, leaning her arms against the rough wood. "Is it true?" she asked softly. Bharat didn't look at her. His jaw muscles feathered as he clenched his teeth. "It's none of your concern." "It is my concern," Sonia pushed back, her voice firm. "I live here. I work here. You set out here, you can't fake it. So don't fake it with me. Are you losing the farm?" Bharat finally turned to face her. The weary, haunted look in his winter sky eyes made her breath catch. "I'm managing it," he said, his voice stripped of its usual authority, sounding dangerously close to defeat. "But Wayne is like a vulture. He smells blood in the water." He walked past her, picking up his heavy leather gloves. "Break is over. We have 40 more head to brand." Sonia watched him return to the fire, her heart heavy. The farm wasn't just his peace, it was his war. And for the first time in her life, Sonia desperately wanted to help someone win a battle that had nothing to do with her. Saturday morning brought a temporary reprieve from the brutal fieldwork. The pantry was bare, and the tractor needed a replacement belt, which meant a trip into the town of Oak Haven. Sonia spent 20 minutes staring into the cracked mirror of her attic room, trying to make herself look presentable. Her designer clothes were either ruined or hopelessly inappropriate for a small-town hardware run. She settled on her least-stained pair of jeans and a simple white t-shirt, pulling her hair back into a sleek ponytail. It was a far cry from her New York socialite aesthetic, but looking at her sun-kissed skin and the newfound muscle tone in her arms, she realized she didn't mind the reflection staring back at her. The drive into town in Bharat's battered old Chevy pickup was quiet, but the silence wasn't strained. It was a companionable quiet, the kind built on shared exhaustion and mutual respect. Oak Haven was a single main street lined with brick storefronts that looked like they hadn't changed since the 1950s. They pulled up in front of Hallberg's Feed and Seed. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully as they walked in. The air inside smelled of molasses, fertilizer, and old leather. Hallberg, a man who looked older than the building itself, was behind the counter, reading a newspaper. "Morning, Bharat," Hallberg grunted, looking up over his reading glasses. His eyes immediately darted to Sonia, widening slightly in surprise. News of the city girl had clearly reached town, but this was her first public appearance. "Morning, Elias. Need a new alternator belt for the John Deere and 10 sacks of the usual feed," Bharat said, stepping up to the counter. As Hallberg shuffled into the back room to retrieve the parts, the door jingled again. Sonia turned and felt an immediate, irrational spike of insecurity. The woman who walked in was stunning in an entirely practical way. She had rich auburn hair pulled into a messy braid, bright, intelligent eyes, and she wore a faded veterinary clinic polo shirt tucked into well-worn jeans. She exuded a confident, earthy energy that made Sonia feel suddenly very small and very out of place. "Bharat Harvey," the woman said, her face breaking into a radiant smile. "I thought I recognized that ugly truck parked out front." Bharat actually smiled, a full, genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his usually stoic face. Sonia felt a strange, sharp pang in her chest. "Hello, Floriana," Bharat said, his voice entirely too warm for Sonia's liking. Floriana Sandstrom walked right up to Bharat and placed a familiar hand on his forearm. "You missed the town council meeting on Tuesday. Wayne Poper was holding court again about expanding his irrigation rights. I had my hands full," Bharat replied, his tone darkening slightly at the mention of Wayne. Floriana's gaze finally shifted to Sonia, her keen eyes assessing her from head to toe. "Ah, the infamous trust fund punishment. I'm Floriana. I'm the large animal vet around these parts." "Sonia," she replied, her tone a little sharper than she intended. She didn't like the way Floriana said punishment. It felt dismissive. "Well, you've certainly got him working you to the bone," Floriana noted, gesturing vaguely to Sonia's plain attire. She turned back to Bharat, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "I'm heading to the diner for a coffee, Bharat. Join me? We need to talk about that chestnut mare's ultrasound." Sonia held her breath, watching Bharat's profile. "I can't today, Flor," Bharat said, gently stepping back from her touch. "We've got a lot of errands, but I'll call you about the mare." Floriana looked disappointed, but quickly masked it with a bright smile. "Don't be a stranger, Bharat. See you around, Sonia." When Hallberg returned with the parts and the transaction was finished, Bharat loaded the heavy sacks of feed into the truck bed with ease. Sonia climbed into the passenger seat, staring out the window, her mood inexplicably sour. Bharat got in, turning the key in the ignition. He didn't put the truck in gear right away. He looked over at her, his brows drawn together in mild confusion. "Are you all right? You've been quiet since the store." "I'm fine," Sonia snapped, crossing her arms. "Your girlfriend seems lovely." Bharat blinked, genuinely taken aback. "Floriana, she's the town vet. She's taken care of my herd for 6 years." "She certainly looked like she wanted to take care of you," Sonia muttered, instantly regretting the petulant words. She sounded like a jealous teenager. Bharat was silent for a long moment. When Sonia finally risked a glance at him, she saw the corner of his mouth twitching with suppressed amusement. "Floriana and I went to high school together," Bharat said slowly, his eyes locked on hers. "We went on exactly 2 dates a decade ago. Decided we made better friends, and that was the end of it. She's married to a guy in Omaha." Sonia felt a hot flush creep up her neck and flood her cheeks. "Oh," Bharat reached out, his calloused fingers brushing gently against her knuckles where her hands were clenched in her lap. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight up her arm. "I don't have time for a girlfriend, Sonia." His voice was a deep, soft rumble that vibrated right through her. "I barely have time to keep this farm breathing. The only things I care about right now are my land, my animals." He paused, his blue eyes searching hers, the air in the cab suddenly feeling incredibly thick and heavy. "And making sure you don't break your neck trying to drive my tractor." He pulled his hand away and shifted the truck into drive, leaving Sonia breathless, her heart hammering a frantic, wild rhythm against her ribs as they drove out of Oakhaven. The suffocating humidity of the afternoon finally broke around 4 o'clock, but not with relief. It broke with violence. The sky bruised into a vicious, turbulent black, swallowing the sun whole. The wind began to howl, ripping across the plains and tearing at the farmhouse shingles. Sonia was in the kitchen helping Juan chop vegetables for a stew when the first crack of thunder rattled the window pane so hard she dropped her knife. Bharat burst through the back door, soaked to the bone in seconds by the driving horizontal rain. "The wind took down a section of the east pasture fence," he shouted over the roar of the storm. "The yearlings are spooked. If they get into the ravine in this mud, we'll lose them. Juan, grab the halters. Sonia, stay here." "No," Sonia yelled back, adrenaline surging through her veins. "You need help. I'm coming." Bharat opened his mouth to argue, saw the stubborn, unyielding fire in her green eyes and nodded once. "Put on your boots and a slicker. Move." The next hour was a blur of mud, terror, and screaming wind. The rain was blinding, a physical force that battered Sonia's face and shoulders. The mud in the pasture sucked at her boots, threatening to drag her down with every step. She ran alongside Bharat, shouting and waving her arms, desperately trying to herd the terrified, bleating calves away from the dangerous drop-off of the ravine. Lightning fractured the sky, illuminating the chaos in stark, blinding flashes of white. She slipped, falling hard into the muck, the breath knocked from her lungs. Before she could panic, strong hands gripped her arms, hauling her roughly to her feet. "Keep moving!" Bharat roared, his face mere inches from hers, rainwater pouring off the brim of his hat. Together, fighting the elements and the animals, they finally managed to drive the last of the strays through the heavy wooden doors of the main barn. Juan wrestled the doors shut behind them, throwing the heavy iron latch into place. The sudden silence inside the barn was deafening, broken only by the heavy breathing of the cattle, the drumming of the rain on the tin roof, and their own ragged gasping. Sonia collapsed against a bale of hay, sliding down until she was sitting on the dusty floor. She was covered head to toe in freezing, foul-smelling mud, her hair plastered to her skull, her muscles trembling with exhaustion. Bharat stood a few feet away, leaning heavily on his knees, catching his breath. He looked up, his eyes finding hers in the dim, shadowed light of the barn. Slowly, he walked toward her. He didn't say a word. He knelt in front of her, reaching out with a hand that was shaking slightly. With surprising tenderness, his rough thumb wiped a thick streak of mud from her cheek. Sonia's breath hitched. She looked up into his winter sky eyes, which were now dark and intense, swirling with an emotion she hadn't seen there before. The space between them seemed to evaporate. The cold, the wet, the exhaustion. It all vanished, replaced by the heavy magnetic pull drawing her toward him. Bharat leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. Sonia closed her eyes, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm, leaning forward to meet him. The harsh, blaring sound of a car horn pierced the gloom of the barn, shattering the moment like glass. They jumped apart, the spell broken instantly. Bharat's expression hardened, the vulnerability vanishing behind an impenetrable wall of stoicism. He stood up abruptly, turning his back on her as he walked toward a small side window that looked out into the yard. "Who is crazy enough to drive in this?" Juan muttered, coming down the aisle from the back stalls. Sonia stood up on shaky legs and walked to the window beside Bharat. Parked near the porch, its headlights cutting blinding swathes through the torrential rain, was a massive black Mercedes G-Wagon. It looked like an alien spaceship in the middle of the muddy farmyard. The driver's side door opened and an umbrella popped out. A man stepped down, meticulously avoiding a puddle, dressed in a sharp, tailored Italian suit that probably cost more than the tractor Bharat had just repaired. Sonia felt the blood freeze in her veins. She knew that posture. She knew that arrogant tilt of the head. "Sonia!" a voice yelled, faint but recognizable over the storm. "Sonia, are you in there?" Bharat looked down at her, his jaw set, a cold, distant look returning to his eyes. "You know him." Sonia swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry despite the dampness of the air. It's Narciso, my boyfriend. Narciso Gualandi, the king of New York nightlife, the heir to a shipping fortune, and the man she hadn't thought about in weeks. Bharat's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't show anger, but the emotional distance he suddenly put between them felt like a physical blow. He stepped away from the window and walked to the heavy barn doors, unlatching them and pulling them open just enough to let a person through. Narciso hurried into the barn, shaking the umbrella furiously. He looked around the dusty, dim interior with an expression of profound disgust. His eyes finally landed on Sonia, and he stopped dead in his tracks, horrified by the mud, the clothes, and the sheer state of her. "My God, Sonia!" Narciso gasped, stepping forward to pull her into a hug before apparently deciding her mud would ruin his suit. He patted her arm instead. "Look at you. It's barbaric. But don't worry, babe. It's over." Sonia just stared at him, her brain struggling to process his presence. "What are you doing here, Narciso?" "I'm rescuing you," he said, flashing $1 million smile that suddenly looked incredibly fake. "I talked to your old man. We cut a deal. I bought him out of a venture capital fund he wanted, and in exchange he agreed to lift the exile. You're free, Sonia. Your trust fund is unlocked. We're going back to the city." He looked around the barn again, his lip curling. "Pack your things. Let's get out of this mud pit." Sonia stood frozen, paralyzed by the sudden, violently crashing collision of her two worlds. She looked at Narciso, offering her the easy, luxurious life she had been begging for just a month ago. Then she looked past him to where Bharat stood in the shadows. His face was entirely unreadable, a mask carved of stone. He wasn't going to fight for her. He wasn't going to ask her to stay. He was letting her go back to the world she belonged to. Sonia looked down at her mud-stained hands, her heart breaking right down the middle. The silence in the barn was absolute, save for the rhythmic drumming of the storm against the tin roof and the harsh, ragged breathing of the three people standing in the dusty aisle. Narciso Gualandi stood like a pristine, unwelcome monument to the life Sonia had left behind, his expensive cologne battling the rich, earthy scent of damp hay and cattle. Sonia stared at him, her mind spinning. "You bought him out?" she repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "You made a business deal with my father to end my punishment?" "It was a win-win, babe," Narciso said smoothly, though his eyes darted nervously to where Bharat stood in the shadows, a towering silhouette of silent fury. "Your old man wanted liquidity for his new venture. My firm provided it. The condition was that he unfreeze your accounts and let you come home. I've missed you, Sonia. The city is dead without you." He reached out, his manicured hand gripping her mud-caked wrist. Sonia flinched. His touch, once familiar and comforting, now felt alien. It felt possessive. "Pack your bags," Narciso urged, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I have a chopper waiting at the airfield in Bismarck. We can be back in Manhattan by morning. No more dirt, no more smelling like livestock, no more pretending to be a peasant." Sonia looked down at her hands. They were raw, calloused, and stained with the Dakota soil. They were the hands of a woman who had just fought a storm to save innocent lives. They were strong. She pulled her wrist out of Narciso's grasp. Narciso blinked, his perfectly sculpted eyebrows drawing together. "What are you doing?" "Sonia, I just told you. You're free." "At what cost, Narciso?" she asked, her voice steadying. "You don't do anything just for love. You never have. What else did my father give you?" Narciso let out a short, patronizing laugh. "Don't overthink it. It's just business. Though, if you must know, we did secure a very lucrative portfolio of agricultural debt in this region. We're backing a local developer, a guy named Wayne Poper. He's going to consolidate these failing family plots into a massive corporate entity. It's a gold mine." The air in the barn seemed to turn to ice. Sonia felt the blood drain from her face, her heart hammering a frantic, violent rhythm against her ribs. Wayne Poper, the vulture, the man who had been harassing Bharat, trying to steal his grandfather's legacy. And Narciso was the one funding him. "You're bankrolling Wayne Poper," Sonia whispered, the horrifying realization washing over her. She looked over her shoulder at Bharat. He hadn't moved a muscle, but his jaw was clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. He was watching her, waiting for her to make her choice, his eyes dark and completely guarded. "It's a solid investment," Narciso defended, stepping closer, his tone turning sharp. "These hillbillies don't know how to run a profitable margin. We're doing them a favor by buying them out before the banks take it all." "Don't you dare call him a hillbilly," Sonia snapped, her voice echoing off the rafters. The sheer venom in her tone made Narciso take a physical step back. The anger that erupted inside her wasn't the petty, entitled rage she had brought to the farm 2 months ago. This was a deep, primal fury born of respect, of sweat, and of a fierce, undeniable love for the land and the man who worked it. "You didn't come here to rescue me, Narciso," Sonia said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "You came here to close a deal and collect your trophy, but I'm not a prize to be won, and I'm certainly not going back with the man who is trying to destroy this farm." Narciso's handsome face twisted into an ugly, cruel sneer. "Are you insane? Look at yourself, you're covered in cow shit. You think you belong here with this hired hand? You're a Lemoyne." He lunged forward, grabbing her arm again, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "You're coming with me right now." Before Sonia could even cry out, a massive, calloused hand clamped down on Narciso's shoulder. Berat moved with terrifying speed, his grip like a steel vice. He didn't yell, he didn't even raise his voice, but the low, guttural growl that came from his chest was enough to make the hairs on the back of Sonia's neck stand up. "Let her go," Berat commanded, his winter sky eyes blazing with a lethal, icy fire. "Or I will break your arm in 3 places." Narciso released Sonia instantly, his face paling as he looked up at the sheer, imposing mass of Berat Harvey. He stumbled backwards, straightening his ruined suit jacket with trembling hands. "You're making a huge mistake, Sonia," Narciso spat, his bravado crumbling. "Your father is going to cut you off permanently when he hears about this. Tell my father he can keep the trust fund," Sonia said, her voice ringing out clear and true. "Now get off our land." Narciso opened his mouth to argue, took one look at Berat's murderous expression, and thought better of it. He turned and practically ran out of the barn, disappearing into the torrential rain. A moment later, the G-Wagon's engine roared to life, and the vehicle spun its tires in the mud before tearing out of the yard. Sonia stood shivering in the aftermath, the adrenaline slowly leaving her body. She turned to look at Berat. The fierce protector was gone, replaced by the stoic, emotionally distant man she had met on her first day. "You shouldn't have done that," Berat said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. "He was your ticket out. I told you I'm losing the farm. You're staying here for a sinking ship. It's my ship too now," Sonia said, stepping toward him, her heart aching at the defeat in his eyes. "I'm not leaving you, Berat." Berat closed his eyes, turning his face away. "Go to the house, Sonia. Get cleaned up. We have a mess to deal with tomorrow." He walked away, disappearing into the dark recesses of the barn, leaving Sonia alone with the thunder. The morning sun rose on a landscape that looked like a war zone. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of brilliant, innocent blue. But the earth was battered. Fences were down, tree branches littered the yard, and the mud was knee-deep in the lower pastures. But the physical damage was nothing compared to the storm brewing in the farmyard. By 10 o'clock, the roar of a sleek black sedan cut through the sound of Juan's chainsaw as he cleared a downed oak. The car parked precisely on the gravel, well away from the mud. Sonia stood on the porch, a mug of black coffee warming her sore hands. She watched as 4 people emerged from the vehicle. Wayne Popin was there, wearing his trademark pristine Stetson and a smirk that made Sonia's blood boil. With him were 3 strangers, a sharp-featured woman in a tailored grey suit, a severe-looking man carrying a thick leather briefcase, and a nervous older woman clutching a stack of files. Berat walked up from the barn, pulling off his work gloves. His face was a mask of grim resignation. He knew what this was. "Morning, Berat," Wayne called out, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Hell of a storm last night. Looks like it did a number on the East Ridge. Tragic, really." "State your business, Wayne," Berat rumbled, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. The woman in the grey suit stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the gravel. "Mr. Harvey, I am Alberta Clausen, Regional Director for the Agricultural Lending Division of Northern Plains Bank. This is Puk Dostalova, our legal counsel, and Gundel Manola, the county clerk and notary." Gundel, a woman who had known Berat's grandfather, gave him a small, apologetic grimace. "We are here regarding the delinquent status of your loans," Albert continued, her voice crisp and devoid of empathy. "As of midnight last night, the grace period for your secondary mortgage expired. Given the recent market fluctuations and the structural damage to the property, the bank has deemed your collateral insufficient to extend further credit." Puk Dostalova opened his briefcase, withdrawing a thick stack of papers. "We are initiating immediate foreclosure proceedings. However, Mr. Popper here has made a generous, above-market offer to purchase the debt directly from the bank. If you sign the deed over to Popper Agriculture today, you walk away clear. If you fight it, we lock the gates tomorrow." Berat stared at the papers. Sonia could see the muscles in his jaw feathering, the profound, crushing weight of generations of Harvey men pressing down on his broad shoulders. He had fought so hard. He had bled for this dirt. And now men in suits were taking it away with the stroke of a pen. "Where do I sign?" Berat whispered, the fight completely draining out of him. "No!" The word cracked through the morning air like a rifle shot. Everyone turned to look at the porch. Sonia marched down the wooden steps, her green eyes blazing with a terrifying corporate fire. She wasn't the muddy farmhand today. She was Sonia Lemoyne, raised in the boardrooms of Manhattan, trained by the most ruthless capitalist in New York. "Nobody is signing anything," Sonia declared, planting herself squarely between Berat and the bank representatives. Wayne laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound. "Little girl, this is big business. Run along and play with the horses." Sonia ignored him, locking eyes with Alberta Clausen. "Ms. Clausen, I am assuming your bank is acting in fiduciary compliance, maximizing returns on distressed assets." Albert blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift in vocabulary. "Yes, of course, which is why Mr. Popper's offer is being bankrolled by Gwalandi Venture Capital out of New York," Sonia interrupted smoothly. "A firm that, as of this morning, is under review by the SEC for predatory real estate monopolization, heavily tied to my father, Richard Lemoyne." Puk Dostalova's eyes narrowed. "And who exactly are you?" "I am Sonia Lemoyne," she said, letting the weight of her family name hang in the air. She saw Gundel Manol's eyes widen in recognition. "And as of midnight last night, my personal trust fund, valued at slightly more than the entire operating budget of your regional branch, was fully unfrozen." She turned to Berat, her expression softening for a fraction of a second before hardening back into a business mask. "Mr. Harvey is not defaulting, because Harvey Farms is taking on a new equity partner. Me." Berat stared at her, utterly stunned. "Sonia, I told you I won't take your charity." "It's not charity, you stubborn cowboy," she shot back, her voice fierce. "It's an investment. I want 40% equity, a seat on the board of operations, and I want Juan to get a raise." She turned back to the bank representatives. "I will wire the outstanding balance of the mortgage, plus a 6-month advance on interest by noon. Puk, you can draft the partnership agreement. Gundel, you can notarize it." Wayne's face had turned an ugly shade of purple. "You can't do this. We had a deal with the bank." "The bank wants money, Wayne," Sonia said, stepping right up to the developer, her gaze unwavering. "And my money clears faster than yours. Your little corporate takeover is dead. You're never touching this land. If you ever set foot on this property again, I will have my father's lawyers tie you up in so much litigation your grandchildren will be born with subpoenas in their hands." Wayne stared at her, veins bulging in his neck, but he saw the cold, absolute truth in her eyes. He turned on his heel, swearing viciously, and stormed back to his truck. Albert Clausen cleared her throat, a sudden, respectful smile appearing on her face. "Well, Miss Lemoyne, it seems we have some paperwork to adjust. We will await your wire transfer." As the bank representatives climbed back into their sedan and drove away, the silence descended on the farmyard once more. Sonia stood breathing heavily, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. She turned around. Juan was leaning against a tractor, a massive grin splitting his weathered face. Berat was just staring at her, looking at her as if he were seeing her for the very first time. He took a slow step forward, the distance between them feeling charged with 1,000 unspoken words. 40%, he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. I debated 50, Sonia replied, a watery smile breaking across her face. But I figured you'd throw a fit about who gets to drive the big tractor. The weeks that followed the storm and the showdown with the bank were the most grueling, yet the most beautiful of Sonia's life. The money she wired saved the farm from foreclosure, but it couldn't mend the fences, birth the late calves, or clear the debris. That required sweat, and Sonia gave it freely. She was no longer serving a punishment. She was an owner. She was building her own legacy. Word of what happened had spread through Oakhaven like wildfire. When Sonia went into town for supplies, Halberg gave her a firm, respectful nod, and Floriana Sandstrom bought her a coffee at the diner, welcoming her to the community with genuine warmth. The city girl moniker vanished, replaced by a quiet, profound respect. It was late October, and the air had turned crisp and biting, hinting at the brutal Dakota winter to come. The harvest was finally in, the silos full, the cattle moved to the winter pastures. For the first time in months, the frantic, desperate energy of the farm had settled into a slow, peaceful rhythm. The sun was sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking strokes of violet, crimson, and gold. Sonia was out by the East Ridge, walking the newly repaired fence line, testing the tautness of the wire with her gloved hand. She was wearing one of Bharat's old flannel shirts over her thermal, her blonde hair tucked under a worn woolen cap. She heard the crunch of heavy boots on the frost-hardened earth before she saw him. Bharat walked up the rise, a silhouette against the dying light. He moved with that same slow, deliberate grace, but the crushing weight that had stooped his shoulders for months was gone. He looked free. He stopped beside her, leaning his forearms on the top rail of the wooden fence, looking out over the sprawling, darkened valley that was safe, once again in his family's name. Juan finished bleeding the tractor lines, Bharat said, his voice a low, comforting rumble in the quiet evening. We're ready for the freeze. Good, Sonia murmured, her breath pluming in the cold air. The weather report says we might get snow by Tuesday. They stood in companionable silence, watching the stars begin to prick through the fading twilight. I got a letter from your father today, Bharat said suddenly. Sonia turned her head, surprised. Richard, what did he want? Is he trying to cause trouble? Bharat reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a piece of heavy, expensive parchment. He didn't hand it to her, just looked down at the scrawled handwriting. He said he was furious when Narciso came back empty-handed. He said he was going to cut you off entirely. But then he looked into what you did here, how you structured the equity, how you faced down the bank. Bharat looked up, his winter sky eyes locking onto hers. He said it was the smartest business deal you've ever made. And he said, he's proud of you. Sonia felt a sudden tightness in her throat. She had spent her entire life trying to earn Richard Lemoyne's approval by wearing the right clothes, attending the right galas, dating the right men. It took coming to the middle of nowhere, covering herself in mud, and defying him completely to finally earn his respect. He also asked, Bharat continued, his voice dropping to a softer, more vulnerable register, when you were coming home. Sonia turned fully toward him, stepping closer so she could feel the heat radiating from his massive frame against the autumn chill. And what did you tell him? Bharat didn't answer immediately. He reached out, his rough, calloused fingers gently pushing a stray lock of blonde hair behind her ear. His touch was incredibly tender, a stark contrast to the hard life he lived. I told him, Bharat whispered, his gaze dropping to her lips, that I hoped you never would. Because my home wouldn't be a home without you in it. The walls were entirely gone. The stoic, unyielding farmer had laid his heart completely bare. He was looking at her with a love so fierce, so deep and rooted in the very earth they stood on, that it stole the breath from her lungs. I'm not going anywhere, Bharat, Sonia said softly, reaching up to cup his jaw, feeling the rough stubble against her palm. I've spent my whole life looking for something real. I found it here. I found it with you. Bharat let out a breath that sounded like a sigh of profound relief. He closed the remaining distance between them, wrapping his strong arms around her waist and pulling her flush against his chest. When his lips finally met hers, there were no car horns to interrupt them. There were no ghosts from the city, no looming debts, no corporate vultures. There was only the cold Dakota wind, the endless expanse of the sky, and the fiery, consuming heat of a kiss that had been building since a sports car first tore down a muddy gravel road. It was a kiss that tasted of rain, of hard work, and of a promise. Sonia wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on tight to the man who had demanded her sweat, challenged her soul, and finally won her heart. She had been sent to the dirt as a punishment, but in the end it was the only place she ever wanted to grow her roots. Sonia Lemoyne arrived at Harvey Farms as a broken, entitled girl seeking an easy escape, but the brutal, honest reality of the land stripped away her illusions. In fighting for the farm alongside the stoic, unwavering Berat, she didn't just find her strength, she found a love built on mutual respect and shared sacrifice. They proved that true wealth isn't measured in trust funds or corporate takeovers, but in the dirt under your fingernails, the legacy you protect, and the person who stands beside you when the storm hits. Harvey Farms stood taller than ever, not as a solitary man's burden, but as an empire built for two. Thank you so much for watching this emotional journey. If Sonia and Berat's story of resilience and true romance touched your heart, please hit that like button and share this video with a friend who loves a great drama. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Drop a comment below. Would you have given up the city life for true love on the farm? Let me know and I'll see you in the next video.